Warning: suicide is discussed. Warning: acts of gun violence are shown. Talia sat with a tissue pressed to her face, her shoulders shaking as she tried to hold herself together. The room had gone painfully quiet, the kind of silence that felt heavier than words. Terrence's personal assistant found him on the floor of his office downtown, she whispered, her voice breaking. Your father's gone, Tate. Tate froze. For a moment it looked like he hadn't heard her, like his mind had refused to process the words. He committed suicide, Talia said through her tears. Terrence used a gun. The reaction was immediate, but different for everyone. Noah felt the air leave his lungs. He stared ahead, completely stunned, unable to find a response. The news didn't feel real. Terrence Blue, the man who had filled so much space in everyone's lives, was suddenly just gone. Tate didn't move. He looked like someone had taken every thought out of his head. His face was blank, his eyes fixed on nothing. For once he had no sarcastic comment, no anger, no defense, no way to protect himself from what he was feeling. Tate, Noah whispered. But Tate didn't answer. All of his friends watched him carefully, waiting for some kind of reaction. They expected anger, they expected tears, they expected something. Instead, Tate just sat there silent. The man who had shaped so many of their lives was gone, and Tate didn't know what he was supposed to feel. Talia lowered her tissue, looking at her son with heartbreak. I'm sorry, she whispered. Tate finally looked up at her. But there was no anger in his eyes. Only confusion. Why, he said quietly. No one knew if he was asking why Terrence had done it, why his father had left them, or why, after everything that happened, he still felt nothing. And that scared Noah more than tears would have. But I just saw him, Noah said, his voice strained. A few days ago, during the last Sunday dinner, he was happy. He was talking about how you both were going to go to Aruba. Noah shook his head, still trying to make sense of it. And now he just kills himself. Talia stared down at the tissue in her hands, her fingers trembling. She nodded slowly, tears gathering in her eyes again. I know, she whispered, I know how it looks. Her voice cracked. The police are down at the office right now. They're going over the scene, but from what the detective told me, it's pretty open and shut. Tate looked up sharply at that, his expression still unreadable. They said it was quick, Talia continued. He didn't suffer. The words hung in the room. Noah looked away, struggling with the sudden weight of it all. Just days ago, Terrence had been sitting at the dinner table. He had been laughing, making plans, acting like the future was still something guaranteed. Now everyone was trying to understand how someone could seem so normal right before making a decision that changed everything. There's nothing we could have done, Talia said softly. Noah looked back at her. We didn't know, she continued, wiping her eyes. We didn't know what was going on in his head. We didn't know he was hurting like that. Tate remained silent. Noah watched him carefully. Everyone else was focused on the shock of losing Terrence, but Noah knew Tate was carrying something different. This wasn't just the death of a father. It was the death of someone who had caused him pain, someone Tate had spent years trying to understand, fear, and escape. And now there would never be a chance to confront him again. Tate's cell phone suddenly rang. The sound cut through the silence of the room. He looked down at the screen, his expression changing slightly as he read the name. I have to take this, Tate said quietly. It's business, I'm going to step out for a moment. No one stopped him. Tate walked out of the room, closing the door behind him. The moment he was gone, Noah's composure finally broke. A sob escaped before he could stop it. Noah! His friends immediately moved toward him. They surrounded him, forming a protective circle around him as they pulled him into their arms. One by one, they hugged him, holding him up as the reality of what had happened finally crashed down. Terrence wasn't just Tate's father. He had been Noah's father figure. The only father Noah had ever truly known. Noah's biological father had died when he was only 3 years old. He had no memories of him, no stories he could personally remember, no moments he could hold onto. But Terrence was different. Noah had met him when he was 4 years old. For almost 24 years, Terrence had been a part of his life. He had been there through childhood, through growing up, through all the years that followed. Even with all the complicated things surrounding the Blue family, Noah had never questioned the place Terrence held in his life. And now he was gone. "I can't believe he's gone," Noah whispered through his tears. His friends held him tighter. Noah looked toward the closed door where Tate had disappeared. "He was my dad too," Noah said quietly. The words hurt as soon as he said them. Because they were true. Terrence had been the person who filled a space Noah never even realized was empty. And now, after losing him, Noah felt that familiar, terrifying loneliness creeping back in. All he had left was Talia. And the thought that one day he could lose her, too, left him feeling like he was standing on the edge of the same darkness all over again. For the second time in his life, Noah felt like he was becoming an orphan. Noah never ranked the people he loved, but if he had to choose the people who meant the most to him, it would have been Tate and Uncle Joey. Terrence was a close third. But Terrence was gone, and there was nothing Noah could do to change that. A sound tore out of Noah that he barely recognized as his own. It wasn't just crying. It was grief, anger, guilt, and helplessness all at once. What hurt the most was knowing how unhappy Terrence had been, knowing that somewhere inside him, Terrence had reached a point where he didn't want to keep living. Noah couldn't stop thinking about it. He couldn't stop wondering if there had been something he could have done, something he should have noticed, something he could have said that might have made Terrence stay. It was almost impossible not to internalize it. How could someone you loved decide that life was too painful to continue? How could you not wonder if you had mattered enough, if you had been enough? Noah knew logically that Terrence's pain had not been caused by him. He knew one person could not carry another person's entire existence on their shoulders, but grief did not always listen to logic. The hardest part was accepting that loving someone does not always mean you can save them. Noah would have given anything to go back to find the moment when Terrence stopped believing things could get better. He would have taken the pain himself if it meant Terrence didn't have to feel it anymore. But he couldn't. All he could do was mourn the man he loved, the man who had been hurting long before Noah understood how deep that hurt went. And that was the cruelest part of losing someone who didn't want to live anymore. You were left behind trying to understand how a person you loved so much could not see the reasons you saw for them to stay. Poor Noah was inconsolable. There was nothing anyone could say that could reach him. The grief was too overwhelming, the questions too painful, and the guilt too heavy. He had reached a point where his body simply couldn't keep going. Andrew finally made the decision to give Noah a sedative so he could sleep. Noah needed a moment where his mind could quiet down, where the pain wasn't constantly pulling him under. Talia was upset too. Seeing Noah like this broke her heart. She helped take him back into the room, and when she saw him sleeping, she stood there quietly, taking in how fragile he looked. "I had to give him an injection," Andrew explained. "He was not doing well." Tate sat down on the couch beside Noah. He looked at him for a long moment, seeing the person he cared about completely exhausted from grief. Carefully, Tate lifted Noah's head and placed it on his lap. Noah's blonde hair was going in every direction, his face relaxed only because sleep had finally taken over. Tate gently ran his fingers through Noah's hair, not wanting to disturb him. For once, there was no argument, no distance, no complicated emotions between them. There was only Noah hurting and Tate staying beside him. Tate didn't know how to take away the pain of losing Terrence. He didn't know how to fix the questions Noah would wake up with. But he could be there. So he stayed on the couch, holding Noah's head in his lap, keeping watch while Noah finally rested. Talia noticed something about Tate that had always unsettled her. Whenever Tate lost someone he cared about, he never cried. It wasn't that he didn't feel anything. It was almost like his body handled grief in a completely different way. Instead of tears, the pain seemed to turn inward. It was as if his body absorbed everything he couldn't express, holding onto it until it had nowhere else to go. Usually it came out another way. A seizure, a shutdown, a moment where he would disappear into himself and leave everyone else trying to understand what had happened. But now, watching Noah fall apart over Terrence, Talia couldn't understand how Tate could sit there so calmly. After an hour of Noah resting with his head in Tate's lap, Tate carefully moved him and stood up. No tears. No visible shock. No breakdown. Nothing showed the devastation everyone else was feeling. He simply walked away, leaving Noah asleep and everyone else sitting with the weight of the loss. Susie watched him go, her expression hardening. Unbelievable, she muttered, he's such an asshole. Talia didn't answer right away. She understood why Susie was angry. From the outside, Tate looked cold, detached, like he didn't care. But Talia knew better. Tate had never been someone who showed pain the way other people did. His grief didn't come out in words or tears, it hid somewhere deeper, somewhere even he couldn't always reach. And sometimes that made him look like the person who cared the least when, in reality, he might have been carrying more than anyone could see. Around 9 o'clock that night, Tate finally came back. He had been gone for 12 hours. The living room in his parents' house was filled with people who had come by after Talia sent out a mass text letting everyone know what had happened. Friends, business associates, and people connected to the Blue family had shown up carrying casseroles, food containers, and anything else they thought might help. The room was quiet in the way rooms became after a loss. Conversations were soft. People moved carefully as if making too much noise would somehow make the reality of Terrence's death heavier. Noah was still asleep, exhausted from everything he had endured. Susie was the first person to notice Tate standing in the doorway. At first she didn't say anything, she just watched him. Something about him was different. As Tate walked farther into the room and sat down on the couch, Susie caught the smell of alcohol on him. But there was something else too, something that made her expression change. The scent of someone else. The unmistakable trace of what he had been doing while he was gone. Susie stared at him, disbelief and anger slowly replacing the sympathy she had felt earlier. Everyone else was sitting there dealing with the aftermath of Terrence's death. Noah had fallen apart. Talia was trying to hold everything together. And Tate had disappeared for 12 hours, only to return smelling like alcohol, sex, and someone else. Tate said nothing. He just sat there on the couch, staring ahead, his face unreadable. Susie shook her head, unable to understand him. "How can you do that?" she whispered, more to herself than anyone else. But Tate didn't respond. Because whatever was happening inside him, whatever grief he carried, remained locked away where nobody else could see it. Tate sat back down on the couch and carefully picked up Noah's head, placing it back on his lap. Noah didn't wake, he was completely exhausted, his blonde hair falling messily across Tate's leg as he slept. After a moment Tate looked toward Talia. "How's Noah feeling?" he asked. Everyone noticed the change in subject. Tate wasn't talking about where he had been or what he had done, he wasn't explaining himself, he was focusing on Noah. "Has he eaten anything?" Tate asked. Susie's anger flared again. She couldn't understand how he could sit there so calmly after everything. "Should I wake him up and give him some food?" Tate asked. Talia looked over at Noah and shook her head gently. "He ate something about an hour ago," she said. "When he wakes up, we need to get some fluids into him, he's been through a lot." Tate nodded quietly. "I went by his favorite restaurant," he said. "I picked him up some food." He reached over and handed the takeout dish to Andrew as Andrew walked into the kitchen and opened the refrigerator. Andrew took it and placed it inside for later. Tate went back to sitting quietly, his hand resting near Noah's shoulder. Susie watched him, still angry and confused. Because Tate could look detached, he could look like he didn't care. But then he would do something like this. He would remember Noah's favorite restaurant, he would make sure he had food waiting for when he woke up, he would sit there holding him like letting go wasn't an option. And that contradiction was what made Tate so difficult for everyone to understand. Tate ran his fingers through Noah's hair, gently pushing the blonde locks away from his face. His hair was damp to the touch and Tate's hand lingered there for a moment. "Has anyone texted Riley?" Tate asked. Andrew nodded as he came back into the living room from the kitchen. "I did," Andrew said. "I sent Riley a message. Noah wouldn't be coming home for a while after the news. Riley sends regards and condolences, of course." Tate looked down at Noah, still asleep against him. "How long is he going to be asleep?" Andrew studied Noah for a moment before answering. "I gave him a second sedative," Andrew explained. He could be out anywhere from 3 to 5 more hours. It usually depends on body mass, height, and how the medication is processed by the individual. He should wake up sometime between midnight and 3 in the morning. Tate nodded quietly. I'll take him home, he said. Talia looked surprised. Are you sure? Tate carefully adjusted Noah's position. His couch is lumpy, Tate said. No offense, mother, but he needs to be in his own bed. For the first time all night there was no argument in Tate's voice. It wasn't about proving anything or avoiding the situation. It was about Noah. Tate carefully picked him up, supporting him as Noah remained asleep, completely unaware of what was happening around him. He carried him outside and walked him to the car, holding him securely as he took him home. Tate carefully buckled Noah into the passenger seat, making sure the seatbelt was secure. He adjusted a pillow behind Noah's head so he would be comfortable during the drive. Noah remained asleep, unaware of the tension still hanging in the house. Susie watched from the living room window as Tate closed the car door. She couldn't hide her anger anymore. I cannot believe that asshole left us all here for 12 hours while he went out to sleep with someone, Susie said bitterly. Talia looked at her, but Susie continued. Your son is a real piece of work. Her frustration had been building all night. Every time there's a funeral, every time someone dies, he does the same thing. He disappears, he avoids it. He plays the same game every single time. Susie crossed her arms, watching Tate get into the driver's seat. I'm telling you, he has a pattern. She shook her head. Mark my words, when it's his father's funeral, he'll do the exact same thing. If Tate actually shows up for his father's service, I will probably faint. Susie paused, her voice filled with disbelief and anger. I'll then alert the Navy. Talia didn't respond immediately. She watched Tate's car pull away, carrying Noah home. Because as angry as everyone was at Tate for leaving, there was something complicated about him that none of them could fully understand. He ran from grief. But somehow, he always came back for the people who needed him. Is it too much to ask? Susie said, her voice filled with frustration. Is it too much to ask that Tate sit here with us, even if he's uncomfortable, and just make sure everyone is okay? She looked toward the door where Tate had left. Is it too much to ask that your son show up to a funeral and be respectful, that he stands beside the people who are grieving instead of disappearing? Talia stayed quiet, listening. Susie shook her head. I guess it is too much to ask, she continued. Because your son always chooses something else. He chooses whatever makes him feel better in the moment. Sex, a party, anything that lets him avoid actually being part of the family when things get hard. Her voice softened slightly, but the anger was still there. He doesn't have to be perfect. Nobody expects him to know what to say. Nobody expects him to magically fix everything. She glanced back at the empty doorway. But sometimes people just need him to stay. Talia looked down because she knew Susie wasn't completely wrong. From the outside, Tate's choices looked cruel. It looked like he abandoned everyone when they needed him most. But Talia also knew there was more to it. Tate had never learned how to sit with grief. He had never learned how to let pain exist without running from it. And sometimes the way he protected himself hurt the people who loved him. There was a knock at the door. Talia opened it to find one of her charity event planners standing there with a casserole dish in her hands and a large jug filled with some kind of juice. It's not too late, is it? The woman asked. I just got done with a charity event at the hospital and thought I'd bring something by. I made a fruit salad too, something a little different. Thank you, Janice, Talia said warmly. That's very kind of you. It was lovely of you to stop by. Janice handed over the food and looked past her into the living room. My son just left 2 minutes ago, Talia added. I'll be sure to let him know you stopped by. Janice's expression softened. I'm so sorry for your loss, dear, she said. When I lost my husband 4 years ago, it was the hardest thing I've ever gone through, but if you need any help, I'm available all day tomorrow. Talia smiled sadly. That's very kind of you. Janice hesitated. Actually, she said, lowering her voice slightly, I also came by to tell you something. Susie immediately noticed the change in Janice's tone. Something about the way she said it made Susie uneasy. It sounded like Janice wasn't about to share good news. I got a call from my niece, Janice continued. She attends UCLA, which is ironic because if I remember correctly that's where Chloe graduated from. Talia looked at her waiting. She told me she got invited to a spur-of-the-moment beach rave tonight celebrating the life and death of his father. Janice paused. And apparently Tate has been hosting a drunken sex orgy for the last 5 hours. The room went silent. I mean, Janice continued carefully, I don't know all the details. I think it was a party, but that's what I was told. Susie's expression hardened. After everything that had happened, hearing that Tate might have spent the night celebrating while everyone else was grieving only added fuel to her anger. Talia didn't say anything. She simply stood there holding the casserole dish, trying to understand how the same person who had carried Noah to the car and picked up his favorite food could also be the person everyone was accusing of running away. Well, I know you have a lot going on, Janice said gently. I just thought you'd want to know where your son is in case you were looking for him. She stepped back, giving Talia a small smile. I'll get out of your hair, call me tomorrow, okay? I don't want to worry. Okay, Janice, Talia said quietly. Janice nodded. I'm glad you have a lot of friends who can help you, she said. I didn't have any children and I can tell you grieving when you're alone is one of the hardest things. At least you have people around you. Talia offered a small appreciative smile. Thank you, that means a lot. Take care, okay? Janice pulled Talia into a warm hug before stepping outside. She walked down the front steps, made her way to her car and drove away. The front door closed behind her. 5 seconds passed. Then Susie exploded. A scream of rage tore through the room. I cannot believe him, she shouted. Everyone froze. Susie's anger had been building for hours, but now it had finally reached its breaking point. He left everyone here to deal with this, and he's out there throwing a sex orgy party. Talia stood silently, absorbing every word. Susie shook her head, furious and hurt. Terrence just died. Noah is barely holding himself together. Everyone came here because they cared, and Tate is somewhere else pretending none of this happened. Her voice cracked with frustration. How many times are people supposed to make excuses for him? Andrew looked over at Susie, his expression uneasy. I don't mean to make this worse, Andrew said carefully, but I've heard rumors. The room quieted. Every time there's a funeral, Andrew continued, people say Tate throws a party like this, like it's some kind of celebration that he's free. Susie's face hardened. Andrew sighed. That's just what I've heard. Several people have talked about it. Once rumors get into the Blue family circle, they spread everywhere. He paused, choosing his words. They say Tate celebrates becoming the new head of the family, that he's the new patriarch of the Blue name, that he inherited more money and more control. Talia looked away. She didn't want to believe it. Not because she thought Tate was incapable of making terrible choices, but because she knew there was always something underneath his behavior that other people didn't see. Susie shook her head. Then maybe people aren't wrong about him, she said. Andrew didn't answer. Everyone in the room had seen 2 versions of Tate that day. The one who disappeared when things became unbearable. And the one who sat on a couch for an hour with Noah's head in his lap, bought him food, and carried him home. Neither version made sense without knowing what was happening inside Tate. And that was what frustrated everyone most. The next morning, Tate drove Noah back over to Talia's house. The house looked different in the daylight. The signs of the night before were still everywhere, empty dishes, folded blankets, and the quiet aftermath of everyone who had gathered to support them. Susie was vacuuming the front living room, cleaning up the space where everyone had eaten the night before. Noah slowly walked inside and made his way to the couch. He looked exhausted. The grief was still sitting heavily on him. His eyes were tired, his movements slow, and as he sat down, his lower lip began to tremble. Susie noticed. For a moment she almost softened. She saw the same broken person everyone had seen the night before, someone who had lost someone he loved, and was struggling to understand how to keep going. But then her anger came back. She thought about Tate leaving. She thought about the party rumors. She thought about Noah sitting there, devastated, while Tate disappeared. And something in Susie snapped. She turned off the vacuum. Noah, she said. He looked up at her. Susie took a breath. There were things she had held back all night. Things she had wanted to say but hadn't because everyone was grieving, because the timing felt wrong, because she didn't want to make things harder. But now she couldn't keep it inside anymore. And she decided to tell Noah everything she had seen, everything she had heard, and everything she believed about Tate. Susie glared at Tate, unable to hold back the anger that had been building inside her. Why did you have a party right after your father died? Tate looked at her, his expression unreadable. Susie stepped closer. I mean it. Her voice shook with frustration. Your father died and you went out and threw a party. Do you have no sensitivity, no sense of kindness, no respect for the dead? Tate scoffed slightly, but Susie didn't let him dismiss it. Your mother was in tears. Noah was so devastated that he had to be sedated twice. Everyone was sitting here grieving, trying to process what happened, and you thought it was the right time to go out and celebrate. Her anger grew. You went out and had a party while everyone who cared about your father was mourning. A night that was supposed to be about loss became about pleasure and distraction. She shook her head. You're acting like someone who only cares about what makes you feel better in the moment. Tate's jaw tightened. You're an asshole, Tate. The words hung in the room. And this isn't the first time. Susie looked around at everyone. Uncle Joey, Uncle Tim, Linus, Aunt Julia, Terrence, correct me if I'm wrong, but there's a pattern here. She looked back at Tate. Every time something painful happens, you disappear, you find something else to focus on, you avoid sitting with everyone else and facing what happened. Her voice lowered. And after a while, people start wondering if you care about anyone besides yourself. The room went silent. Tate didn't answer. Because the accusation hurt precisely because everyone knew there was something complicated underneath it. He had been there for Noah. He had carried him home. He had made sure he ate. But he had also left. And to everyone watching from the outside, those two truths were impossible to reconcile. Look at me, Susie shouted. Tate didn't move. Look at me when I'm talking to you about how insensitive and cruel this is. Her voice echoed through the room. Your father died, Tate, your father, the man who gave you life, the man who raised you, the man who gave you every opportunity he could. He gave you his name, his resources, his protection, and everything his position in this family could provide. Susie pointed toward him. You're carrying his legacy now. Whether you like it or not, you are the person who represents what he left behind. And how dare you treat that legacy like it doesn't matter? Tate's expression remained unreadable, but the room could feel the weight of her words. You are one of the worst sons I have ever seen. The silence afterward was painful. If you don't show up for your father's funeral, Tate, some people around here are going to be done with you. Susie shook her head. I don't want to be seen around someone who treats their family's funerals like optional events, like something you can just stop by whenever it's convenient, like you're running an errand at Target or Macy's. Her voice softened, but the disappointment was still there. Some things are bigger than you, some moments are not about what you want or what makes you comfortable. She looked at Tate. Sometimes you show up because someone you loved deserves that respect. Susie shook her head, her anger mixing with disappointment. You act like your father's death means nothing. Tate stayed quiet. You knew that man for almost 30 years, Tate. He was your life. He should have been the person you trusted most, the person you looked up to, the person you built your life around. Her voice trembled. He was the man you patterned yourself after. Susie took a breath, trying to hold back the emotion behind her words. I've met some terrible fathers in my life. I've met fathers who hurt their children, fathers who abandoned them, fathers who didn't deserve the title. She looked directly at Tate. Your father was as close to a saint as a person could get. He gave you everything he had. He loved you, he built a life for you, and he does not deserve the way you are treating his memory. The room went silent. I'm ashamed of you, Tate blew. The words landed harder than the anger. Utterly ashamed. Susie looked around the room. And everyone else here is too, they just don't have the balls to say it. Her eyes returned to Tate. Because everyone is afraid of you, afraid of upsetting you, afraid of what you'll do or how you'll react. She shook her head. But I'm not. Her voice lowered. You let other people make your choices for you, you let your impulses control you, you let yourself be dragged around by whatever feels good in the moment instead of standing up and doing what's right. Susie stared at him. You're better than this, Tate, but right now you're acting like someone who doesn't care about anyone but himself. Tate finally looked up at Susie. I'm not going to be lectured by some bitch in my own house. The room went completely silent. This is my house now, Tate continued. If you don't like it, then get the hell out. Susie stared at him, stunned by the coldness in his voice. If you're going to stay here, then stop judging me. If you don't like the way I grieve, nobody is forcing you to be here. If you don't like the way I live my life, go find somewhere else to stand and complain there. Tate's jaw tightened. I don't have to explain myself to people who don't even understand my world. His eyes moved around the room. You're here because Noah likes having you around, that's the only reason. The insult hung in the air. But if you keep getting on my nerves, you won't be here anymore. Susie opened her mouth, but Tate cut her off. If you want to keep squawking, do it somewhere else. For a moment, everyone expected him to keep arguing. Instead, Tate turned and walked away. He left the living room and went into the kitchen. A few moments later, the sound of the refrigerator opening filled the silence. Tate stood alone in the kitchen, making himself a sandwich as if nothing had happened. As if he hadn't just shattered the room with his words. But behind the anger, behind the arrogance, and behind the cruelty everyone saw, there was something else. Something Tate refused to let anyone witness. Because admitting Susie's words hurt would mean admitting she had reached a place inside him that he had spent years protecting. 5 minutes later, Tate came back out of the kitchen carrying 2 saucers. The room was still tense from the argument, the kind of silence where everyone was waiting for the next explosion. Tate didn't acknowledge anyone at first. He walked over to Noah and quietly handed him one of the saucers. Eat, he said. Noah looked down at the sandwich, his hands still unsteady. He looked exhausted, his eyes swollen from crying, but he took the plate. Tate sat down nearby with his own food, a burrito on his saucer, and took a bite as if the argument from a few minutes earlier hadn't happened. Then he looked toward Susie. I'm Tate Blue, he said flatly. I don't answer to anybody. His voice was calm, but there was a sharpness underneath it. And I sure as hell am not going to sit here and be lectured in my own house by someone who doesn't even own 5% of the fortune I possess. Susie stared at him. Tate leaned forward slightly. You know that trust Joey gives you every month. The room became even quieter. The $10,000 he sends you, I'm the one who will be overseeing that now. I'm the one who will be responsible for it. He pointed his fork slightly toward her. So I'd watch your mouth, Missy. Susie's expression hardened. Tate wasn't just angry. He was defensive, wounded, and lashing out in the only way he knew how, by reminding everyone of the power he had. But then his eyes shifted back to Noah. The anger on his face changed. Now stop. His voice lowered. You're irritating me and upsetting Noah. Noah sat quietly, barely touching his food. He just lost his father, Tate said. He doesn't need to sit here listening to people tear each other apart. For a moment nobody spoke. Tate went back to eating his burrito, acting like the conversation was over. But everyone in the room noticed the contradiction. Tate could be cruel when he felt attacked. He could use his money and his position like weapons. But when it came to Noah, even in the middle of his own anger, he was still watching. Still protecting. Still making sure Noah ate. Susie looked at Tate, and for the first time, her anger seemed to mix with genuine concern. I really worry about you, Tate. He didn't respond. Why can't you grieve like a normal person? The question hung in the air. I've seen people in psychiatric wards on television who show more emotion than you do. Talia looked uncomfortable, but Susie kept going. Are you incapable of feeling something? Do you not understand how this looks to everyone else? Her voice cracked with frustration. Sometimes it feels like you're completely cold, like you don't care who you hurt as long as you don't have to sit with your own pain. Tate's expression tightened. Because this isn't the first time. Susie shook her head. We've been through this over and over again. 5 or more times we've had to deal with loss and you disappear. you leave everyone else to carry the grief while you run from it. She looked around the room. People are mourning, they're hurting, they're trying to say goodbye to someone they loved. Then she looked back at Tate. And every time we're left wondering where you are and why you can't just be here with us. The room went quiet. Susie's voice softened slightly. I don't know if you don't know how to grieve or if you're so afraid of feeling anything that you shut everything down. She paused. But watching you act like this makes people wonder if there's anything inside you at all. Tate kept glaring at Susie, his jaw tight. He didn't say anything. But then Noah suddenly broke. A sob escaped him, and within seconds his face crumpled as tears started falling again. Tate's expression changed immediately. A frustrated sound left him. Now look what you've done, Susie, Tate said. He moved quickly, pulling Noah closer and easing him partially onto his lap. There, Tate murmured. He wrapped an arm around Noah and began patting his back slowly, trying to calm him. Don't let that mean blonde woman upset you. Susie looked stunned. Tate wasn't looking at her anymore. All of his attention was on Noah. It's okay, Tate whispered, Tate's here. Noah cried against him, overwhelmed by everything he had been holding in. Yes, Tate said softly, almost cooing as he rubbed his back. I know. For all the anger, the arrogance, and the harsh words Tate had thrown around moments before, his entire demeanor shifted when Noah started crying. He became gentle, protective, almost instinctive. The room fell silent as everyone watched the contradiction unfold. The same man who seemed unreachable when it came to his own grief was the first person to comfort someone else's. Everyone watched in silence as Tate reached over and picked up one of Noah's favorite childhood books. It was a book Noah had loved when he was younger, one of those small pieces of comfort that belonged to a different time, before grief, before loss, before everything had become complicated. Tate carefully leaned Noah back against him, making sure Noah's head was supported comfortably in his lap. Then he opened the book. It was a story about a little pig. Tate began reading quietly, his voice softer than anyone in the room expected. As he read, he slowly rocked Noah back and forth, one hand gently supporting Noah's head while the other held the book. Noah's breathing gradually began to calm. The tears didn't stop immediately, but the panic behind them started to fade. Tate kept reading. He didn't care who was watching. He didn't care about the argument anymore. For that moment there was only Noah. Susie stood there completely speechless. She had spent the last hour seeing Tate as cold, arrogant, and impossible to reach. But now she was watching the same person cradle a grown man like he was trying to put a frightened child back at ease. She didn't know what to make of it. Because the man sitting in front of her was the same man she had just accused of not caring. And yet he was the one holding Noah, reading to him, and patiently helping him survive the worst moment of his life. Noah fell asleep halfway through the book. Tate noticed almost immediately. The tension in Noah's body had finally eased, his breathing becoming slow and steady as exhaustion took over. His head rested against Tate, the tears finally replaced by sleep. Carefully, Tate lowered the book and adjusted Noah's position. He guided Noah's head more comfortably into his lap, making sure his neck was supported. Then he reached over and pulled a blanket up, tucking it gently underneath Noah's chin. For a moment, Tate just looked down at him. The room was quiet. Everyone had been so focused on Tate's anger, his words, and the way he defended himself that they almost forgot the person sitting in front of them was also the one who had stayed beside Noah through the worst moment of his life. Tate leaned back slightly and let out a small laugh. Well, I guess I'm trapped for the next 2 hours. The comment was light, almost joking. He looked down at Noah, who didn't move. Of course, you'd fall asleep right when I get comfortable. There was a small smile on Tate's face. Nobody in the room had seen that side of him during the argument. The man who had been so defensive and sharp moments before was now sitting perfectly still, unwilling to move because Noah finally looked peaceful. And for once, Tate seemed content to stay exactly where he was. Noah's shoulders trembled as hot tears streamed down his cheeks. He sniffled helplessly, unable to stop crying. He had always hated arguments, Raised voices dragged him straight back to childhood, to memories of his mother screaming that he was a disappointment, calling him a fag, a loser, and worse. Even years later, those words still echoed in the back of his mind. Without hesitation, Tate pulled Noah fully onto his lap, wrapping an arm securely around his back and holding him against his chest. Susie opened her mouth to speak again. Tate looked up. The glare he gave her was enough to make her immediately think better of it. She closed her mouth without saying another word. Talia quietly handed Tate a blanket. He draped it around Noah's shoulders, tucking it gently around him before resting a reassuring hand on the back of Noah's head. "Nobody is going to say anything else that's going to upset you," Tate said softly, stroking Noah's hair. "I've got you." Andrew was already watching from across the room. "Andrew," Tate called without taking his eyes off Noah, "would you get him a glass of water?" Andrew nodded once and disappeared into the kitchen. Tate gently rubbed slow circles across Noah's back, waiting until his breathing steadied just a little. "Listen to me," he murmured. "Every time you wake up, I want you to drink one full glass of plain water before anything else. No coffee, no soda, nothing else until you've had that water. Crying dehydrates you, and I don't want you feeling any worse than you already do." Noah gave a small, shaky nod against Tate's chest. "Okay," he whispered through another sniffle. "Good," Tate said, lightly patting the back of Noah's head. "We'll take it one glass of water at a time. You don't have to worry about anything else right now." Noah suddenly burst into tears again, his body shaking with quiet sobs. "It's all right," Tate said gently, rubbing slow circles across Noah's back. "Cry if you need to." He rested his chin lightly against Noah's head before speaking again. "One thing that's unfortunately common in my family is that my relatives have died one after another over the years. There are far fewer of us now than there used to be." He glanced toward Talia. "At this point, it's mostly just my mother and me." The room fell silent. Susie inhaled as if she were about to say something. Before a single word left her mouth, Tate stomped his foot sharply against the floor. The sound echoed through the room. He fixed her with a warning look. "Susie," he said firmly, "if you can't be kind, then go make dinner." Susie's mouth snapped shut. She stared at him for a moment, realized he wasn't bluffing, and quietly turned toward the kitchen without another word. Tate's attention immediately returned to Noah. He brushed a few damp strands of hair away from Noah's face and continued rubbing his back. "You don't have to hold it together for anyone," he murmured. "If you need to cry, then cry. You're safe here and I'm not going anywhere." Noah sniffled helplessly and wiped his nose against the front of Tate's shirt before another wave of tears escaped him. Under any other circumstances, no one would have dared do that. Tate's clothes were notoriously expensive. The tailored shirt Noah had just wiped his face on had cost nearly $5,000. Tate didn't so much as glance at the stain. His only concern was the young man crying in his lap. Susie quietly approached with a box of tissues, setting it within Noah's reach. Tate looked at her briefly before taking a few tissues himself. He gently wiped Noah's nose and cheeks, then placed the box beside him. "There," he said softly, "don't worry about my shirt." Noah let out another shaky sob, still clutching the front of Tate's clothing. Once Noah had settled slightly, Tate addressed the room. "I've already called the funeral home and finalized the initial arrangements," he said calmly. "They'll come tomorrow afternoon to bring my father's body into their care." Everyone listened in silence. "The funeral will be held on the 12th, Tate continued. "That will be 2 days after he passed away." He paused before continuing. "I've already contacted the guests who need to be there. My father was an important man and I expect a very large attendance." He glanced toward Andrew. "We're planning seating for at least 1,000 people. If attendance exceeds that, we'll make additional accommodations, but anyone who can't find a seat may have to stand." No one questioned him. The only sound in the room was Noah's quiet sniffling as Tate continued to hold him, occasionally rubbing his back and absent-mindedly smoothing his hair, seemingly unconcerned that his designer shirt was now damp with tears and smeared with tissues. For Tate, it was just a shirt. Noah mattered far more. "All the arrangements are taken care of. Are you coming?" Talia asked. Every eye in the room turned toward Tate. Susie, Noah, Andrew, Jack, and Anna all waited silently for his answer. Tate looked down for a moment before shaking his head. "I'll probably run into people at the reception," he said quietly. Talia stared at him in disbelief. "You're not going to come to the funeral." Nearby, Susie let out a frustrated sigh, folding her arms across her chest. "Tate." "I don't do funerals," Tate said evenly, his expression unreadable. "Everyone here knows that." A heavy silence settled over the room. No one spoke. Noah looked at Tate, searching his face for any sign that he might change his mind, but there was none. Tate's voice wasn't angry or dismissive, it was matter-of-fact, as though he were stating an unchangeable fact. "I've never gone to one," Tate continued. "Not for family, not for friends, it isn't personal, I just don't do them." The explanation did little to ease the tension. Susie looked ready to argue while Talia's disappointment was written plainly across her face. Andrew and Jack exchanged uneasy glances, unsure whether to press the issue or let it go. Noah remained silent, realizing this wasn't stubbornness so much as one of the rigid boundaries Tate had lived by for years. "Couldn't you make an exception?" Talia asked softly. Tate shook his head. "If I make one exception, then all my other dead relatives will haunt me for playing favorites." Susie pinched the bridge of her nose in exasperation. "Tate, that's not funny." "I wasn't trying to be funny," he replied calmly. "I'm serious." The room fell silent again. "Honestly, funerals are a waste of time," Tate continued. "The last thing I want to do is stand around talking about nostalgia or listening to people remember events that didn't even happen the way they say they did. Every funeral turns into a story people rewrite to make themselves feel better." His gaze drifted toward the window. "The dead don't want us to cry," he said quietly. "They're beyond all of this. Funerals are for the living, not for them." Noah watched him carefully. There wasn't any cruelty in Tate's voice, only a detached certainty that made it impossible to argue with him. Talia looked heartbroken, while Susie seemed torn between anger and understanding. Andrew and Jack exchanged uncertain glances, realizing Tate wasn't refusing out of spite, he genuinely believed every word he was saying. "The only reason anyone should be in a cemetery is that they're dead," Tate said. "It's dark, morbid, disturbing, and sad. Why would I willingly put myself in that environment?" He shrugged as if the answer were obvious. "I have a limited number of days on this planet. I'm not going to waste one of them standing around crying next to a corpse. Get on with your life. People die, it's part of life, it's not something I want to spend all day dwelling on." The room had gone completely silent. "I'd rather get laid," Tate added bluntly, "which is exactly where I'm going right now." He turned and headed for the front door. "Tate," Susie shouted after him. He paused with his hand on the doorknob but didn't look back. "What?" he asked flatly. "You cannot seriously walk out of here after saying something like that." Tate finally glanced over his shoulder. "I can," he replied, "and I just did." He opened the door and walked out, leaving the room in stunned silence. No one moved for several long seconds. Talia looked as though she wanted to cry, Jack stared at the floor in disbelief, Andrew rubbed a hand over his face, and Noah remained frozen, watching the door slowly swing shut behind Tate. The funeral was held on February 12th. Nearly everyone in Los Angeles who was considered somebody had attended. As with every high-profile funeral, the Blue family became the center of attention. Politicians, executives, philanthropists, celebrities, and influential business leaders filled the chapel, offering condolences while quietly networking between conversations. The mayor, the lieutenant mayor, and many of the city's most prominent business figures were present. Expensive black suits and designer dresses blended together as hushed conversations echoed through the gathering. For many attendees, the funeral had become as much a social obligation as a farewell. Talia tried to stay composed. She stood off to the side of the reception area, clutching a bottle of water and taking slow sips, doing everything she could to keep herself from breaking down. Jack, Mark, and Bree remained close to her, offering quiet support whenever another wave of guests approached with condolences. Across the room, Noah sat silently with Susie, Anna, and Andrew. None of them had much to say. They simply watched the endless procession of mourners, each lost in their own thoughts as they waited for the service to begin. One absence was impossible to ignore. Tate's chair remained empty. Although few outside the family noticed, those closest to him couldn't help glancing toward the entrance every so often, wondering if, against all expectations, he might walk through the doors at the last moment. He never did. Tate's seat at the head row, beside Talia, remained empty. The vacant chair seemed louder than anything the minister had said all morning. Susie stared down at the funeral pamphlet, gripping it so tightly the paper began to wrinkle. "If that bastard doesn't show up," she muttered through clenched teeth, "I'm going to freaking lose it." She glanced around the chapel before lowering her voice. "In private, of course," she added, "I can only handle so much." She shook her head in disbelief. "Everyone is here to celebrate a life, to remember someone we loved, and Tate Blue is probably somewhere thinking with his dick instead." Anna nudged Susie gently with her elbow. "Not now," she whispered. "No," Susie hissed back, never taking her eyes off the empty chair. "I'm serious. Talia's husband is dead, Noah's father is dead, this family is falling apart, and the one person everyone expected to be sitting in that seat couldn't even be bothered to show up." Noah remained silent, his eyes drifting to the empty chair beside Talia. Somehow, its emptiness was more painful than if someone else had been sitting there. Every few minutes, despite knowing better, his gaze wandered back toward the chapel doors. They never opened. The chapel service was elegant and impeccably organized. More than 800 people attended, filling nearly every seat in the sanctuary. Family, friends, business associates, politicians, philanthropists, and members of Los Angeles' social elite gathered to pay their respects. Following the eulogy, nearly 30 people stood in line to share a brief memory of Terrence or to speak about the impact he had made on the city. Some recalled his generosity, others spoke of his sharp business instincts, his philanthropy, or the opportunities he had created. Several described the advice he had given them over the years, while others thanked him for supporting charities, hospitals, and community projects. Terrence had been the wealthiest man in Los Angeles and one of its most influential figures. During his 25 years in the city, he had helped finance and support the campaigns of 6 successful mayoral candidates, making him a powerful force in local politics. His name carried weight in business, philanthropy, and civic leadership alike. Many of Los Angeles' most prominent executives and public officials attended the service. Several well-known celebrities also came to pay their respects, slipping quietly into the chapel alongside billionaires, judges, civic leaders, and longtime friends. Despite their status, they stood in the same line as everyone else, each waiting their turn to offer condolences to the Blue family. At the front of the chapel, Talia sat through every speech with remarkable composure, though the grief in her eyes never faded. Beside her, one chair remained empty. It was the seat reserved for Tate. Throughout the service, no one filled it. Its emptiness served as a silent reminder that, despite the hundreds of people gathered to honor Terrence's life, one member of the Blue family had chosen not to attend. One by one, friends and colleagues approached the pulpit to share their memories of Terrence. When it was Susie's turn, she took a steadying breath before speaking. "Terrence believed in people before they believed in themselves," she said. "Years ago, he wrote me a letter of recommendation that opened doors I never thought I'd walk through. Because of that letter, I've had several successful art exhibitions over the last 5 years. He never asked for anything in return, he simply wanted to help." She smiled sadly. "I'll always be grateful for his kindness." After Susie returned to her seat, Mark stepped up to the microphone. "When I wanted to start my own public relations and entertainment agency," he began, "every bank turned me down. Terrence didn't invest in my company directly. Instead, he met with the bank and convinced them I was worth the risk. They approved a $5 million business loan." Mark paused, looking toward Talia. "That single conversation changed my life. My business exists because someone as successful as Terrence was willing to put his reputation behind me. I'll never forget that." By the time the final condolences had been offered, the procession moved from the chapel to the cemetery for the burial. Hours later, the family returned to Talia's house. Susie unlocked the front door while Talia stood quietly on the porch, emotionally drained. Jack and Mark followed behind carrying floral arrangements, while Susie carefully brought in several gift baskets, sympathy cards, and meals that mourners had dropped off throughout the day. From the beginning of the chapel service to the final farewell at the cemetery, nearly 4 hours had passed. It had been 4 long hours filled with handshakes, embraces, condolences, memories, and well-wishes, by the time everyone stepped inside the house. The silence felt almost startling after the constant stream of voices that had surrounded them all day. Talia sank slowly into a chair, exhausted, while the others quietly unpacked flowers and gifts, the reality of Terrence's absence settling over the home once more. Talia walked through the front door with Noah, Susie, Mark, Jack, Anna, and the others closed behind. The moment she looked into the living room, she froze. Susie, who had been carrying several stacks of Tupperware containers filled with food from the reception, followed Talia's gaze. The containers slipped from her hands and crashed onto the hardwood floor. The house was packed. At least 200 young women filled the living room and spilled into the adjoining rooms. Some wore bikinis, others one-piece swimsuits, cocktail dresses, or revealing party clothes. Music pulsed through the house as laughter echoed off the walls. Waiters moved through the crowd carrying trays of drinks, and someone had transformed the Blue Mansion into what looked like a lavish pool party. For a moment no one spoke. It looked exactly like one of Tate's infamous parties. Susie's mouth fell open. "You've got to be kidding me." Talia stared in disbelief, too stunned to process what she was seeing. This is my house." The music continued as if no one had noticed the family standing in the foyer. Guests chatted, danced, and laughed, completely unaware that the funeral procession had just returned home. Noah slowly scanned the crowd. He didn't even have to ask who had organized it. Only one person would have had both the audacity and the resources to throw a massive party in the Blue Mansion on the afternoon of Terrence's funeral. "Tate," Noah whispered. Susie stood frozen in the doorway, her eyes widening as the scene unfolded before her in vivid detail. 6 women knelt on the floor in a tight circle around Tate, their bare knees pressing into the carpet. They were draped over him like living blankets, bodies curved and leaning in close. Tate has oral sex with the girls in the living room. Scene retracted, read the extended version on Wattpad. Tate sat slumped in the center of it all, his head tilted back, eyes shut tight. His chest rose and fell in uneven breaths. A faint sheen of sweat covered his skin and his mouth hung slightly open. He looked completely out of it, like whatever had been slipped into his system was keeping him floating just above reality. Every few seconds his hips gave a small, involuntary twitch upward, pushing into the mouths working on him. Scene retracted, read the extended version on Wattpad. Their hands rested on his thighs, holding him steady. The 4 women on his arms never stopped touching, stroking, squeezing, running their fingertips over every inch of available skin. One of them even leaned in to nuzzle her face against his shoulder, breathing him in. Susie's scream ripped through the room without warning. "Tate." His eyes snapped open, glassy and unfocused at first. The 2 women looked away at the same time. They both looked up at Susie with calm, almost curious expressions, tongues still slightly extended. The other 4 women kept their hands exactly where they were, continuing to caress his arms as if nothing had happened. One of them gave his bicep a slow, possessive squeeze. Tate blinked hard, trying to focus on the woman standing in the doorway. His cock remained hard, bobbing slightly with each heartbeat, still wet from the attention it had just received. Susie," his voice came out thick and slurred, barely more than a whisper. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Susie shouted, her voice cutting through the music. The conversation stopped. Heads turned. "We just got back from a funeral and we walk into one of your parties." She pointed across the room. "Your wife is standing right there." Chloe stood frozen near the doorway, staring at a spot on the wall, refusing to look toward the center of the room where Tate was surrounded by a crowd of scantily dressed women. The humiliation on her face was impossible to miss. Susie threw her hands into the air. "Can you please get them out of here? Your mother's been through enough today. She's exhausted, she's hungry, she's grieving, and she needs to relax, not come home to this." She gestured at the partygoers filling the mansion. "She does not need to walk into a house full of women in bikinis while music is blasting through the walls." The room fell silent. Every guest looked toward Tate, waiting to see how he would respond. Behind Susie, Talia stood motionless, too emotionally drained to even raise her voice. After 4 hours of condolences, speeches, and burying her husband, she simply stared at the spectacle unfolding in her own living room, looking more defeated than angry. Noah, Mark, Jack, and Anna remained by the front door, equally stunned as the party came to an uneasy standstill. One of his girls gave his nipple a slow, possessive pinch. Tate blinked hard, trying to focus on the woman standing in the doorway. His cock remained hard, bobbing slightly with each heartbeat, still wet from the attention it had just received. "It's rude to interrupt the women while they're doing a job," Tate said, his voice thick and slurred. "Especially if you interrupt me having my business taken care of." He turned his head slightly, looking over at Noah, who was staring at the floor, clearly trying to look anywhere but at Tate's nudity. "I'm trying to look anywhere else," Noah muttered, his face flushed. "You losers are prudes," Tate grinned, then gave a lazy nod, his hips still twitching slightly from the lingering sensation of the women's mouths. "All right, ladies, except for Terry, Candy, Julia, Morgan, and Philippa, everyone else get out. You ladies can go upstairs to the third floor, the last room on the left, and undress. I'll be up there in a minute." The four women who had been dismissed slowly pulled their hands away from Tate's body, their fingers trailing over his skin one last time before they stood up. The two who had been sucking his cock also rose, wiping their mouths with the backs of their hands. They all filed out of the room without a word, leaving only Terry, Candy, Julia, Morgan, and Philippa kneeling around him. Tate's eyes drifted back to Susie, his expression still glazed and unfocused. Susie's disgust was written all over her face as the remaining women, Terry, Candy, Julia, Morgan, and Philippa, kept their hands all over Tate. Tate lay there completely exposed, his cock hard and leaking, his hips jerking up into their touches without any control. The four dismissed women gathered their things and left the room naked, heading straight for the stairs. They didn't bother covering themselves as they climbed. Their bare asses swayed with every step, and the sound of their bare feet on the hardwood echoed through the house. Family members and friends in the hallway froze, eyes widening as they tried to look anywhere else. Some turned their backs, others stared at the floor, but no one said a word. Tate pushed himself up with a lazy grin, his dick still bobbing in front of him. He grabbed his pants from the floor and stepped into them, leaving them unbuttoned so his shaft stayed half visible. "I thought the funeral wasn't supposed to be over until 6. It's 4:59, he said, glancing at his watch with a smirk. Susie's mouth twisted in revulsion, her eyes flicking between Tate's exposed body and the women still groping him. "This is disgusting," she muttered, voice tight. "You missed the funeral and you're letting them." Tate cut her off with a shrug. "Don't worry about the mess. In 20 minutes I'll have somebody come in and clean everything. I always pay a cleaning lady to take care of whatever needs to be taken care of. Well, I have my needs taken care of. The house should be quiet. My room is soundproof, so you won't hear my party upstairs with the nice ladies who are volunteering to help me with a little problem I have. You're welcome to join Chloe if you want." He turned and headed for the stairs, pants still hanging low on his hips. His bare ass flexed with each step, the fabric doing nothing to hide the way his cock swung. The women upstairs were already giggling, the sound carrying down the hall as they waited for him. Susie stayed frozen in the doorway, watching his retreating figure with open contempt, while the remaining girls kept their hands busy on his body until the very last second. Noah's gaze lifted from the floor just as Tate finished zipping up, his cock still half hard and visible through the open fly. The sight made Noah's breath catch. He took a small step forward, eyes locked on the way Tate's ass moved with each stair he climbed, slow, deliberate, hips rolling like he knew someone was watching. Susie's fingers clamped around Noah's wrist before he could take another step. "Don't even think about it," she hissed. "Don't disgrace Terrence Blue like that. Sit down," she pointed at the sofa. Noah dropped onto the cushion with a pout, knees pressed together, hands clenched in his lap. Susie turned on Chloe next. "Nobody is going to pretend Tate's behavior is normal. It's a disgrace to have an orgy during his father's funeral, across town. It's disgusting, and you're his wife." She jabbed a finger at Chloe. "You're okay with this?" Chloe sighed, arms folded. "He's not doing it in public, Susie. He's a married man, sure, but he's not cheating on me. As long as he's happy and he's a decent guy towards me, I don't care. I'd be up there with him, but I'm not really into threesomes. Let it go. He's not hurting anyone we know. He doesn't know any other way to move on after funerals. It's his way, and we just have to deal with it or keep our distance." From the third floor came the unmistakable sound of female laughter, high, breathless, followed by the solid click of Tate's bedroom door shutting. The soundproofing swallowed everything after that, but the image of what was happening behind it lingered. Noah stared at the ceiling, face flushed, cock straining against his pants as he pictured Tate surrounded by the 5 women, all of them naked and eager, ready to finish what they'd started downstairs. While Susie was distracted talking to Chloe, Noah kept his eyes on the stairs. He had never wanted to spy on Tate when he was with other women. That had never been who Noah was. Still, he couldn't pretend the thought had never crossed his mind. Curiosity was different from voyeurism. Even though he refused to look or watch, he sometimes wondered what it would be like if Tate had ever wanted him instead. The thought made Noah uncomfortable. He lowered his gaze even further, choosing to focus on the floor rather than the chaos unfolding on the next floor. Around 9 that evening, the last of the women came downstairs, mostly dressed and collecting their belongings before leaving through the front door. Several of them laughed among themselves as they thanked Tate, and a few tucked thick envelopes of cash into their purses before heading outside. Jack, Mark, and Andrew looked away awkwardly as the steady stream of guests filed past them. When the house had finally emptied, Tate descended the staircase. He still wasn't wearing a shirt. Without a word, he crossed the living room and dropped onto the couch, touching his crotch through his pants, leaning back with an unmistakably smug expression, as though he'd just won the lottery. The silence in the room was deafening. Susie stared at him in complete disbelief. "Are you finished?" she asked sharply. Tate folded one arm over the back of the couch and smiled faintly. "For today," he replied. Noah kept his eyes lowered, while Talia simply closed her eyes for a moment, exhausted. After the emotional strain of the funeral, the last thing she had expected was to spend the evening dealing with yet another spectacle in her own home. Jack, Mark, and Andrew exchanged weary glances, realizing this day had somehow become even more unbelievable after they had left the cemetery. Tate stretched out on the couch, looking completely at ease. Susie stared at him, incredulous. "Aren't you even going to ask how your father's funeral was?" Tate let out an exaggerated groan and pulled a face. "Definitely not." The room fell silent. "Funerals are bland, boring affairs," he said. "I'd rather do almost anything else. The only thing more boring than cemeteries is listening to someone spend hours talking about their children." Susie's jaw dropped. "You cannot be serious." "I am." Tate glanced toward the front windows. "I'm hungry. I ordered dinner. It should be here in about 20 minutes. The contrast was almost surreal. Everyone else looked emotionally exhausted after spending the day at the chapel and cemetery, while Tate spoke as though it had been an ordinary afternoon. Noah sat quietly, unsure what to say. Talia simply rubbed her temples, too drained to argue, while Jack, Mark, and Andrew exchanged weary looks. Susie, however, continued glaring at Tate, wondering how anyone could be so detached after everything that had happened. Tate scooted closer to Chloe and gently pulled her onto his lap. Chloe pressed her lips together, trying not to laugh despite everything that had happened that day. "Don't worry, honey," Tate said, absent-mindedly stroking her hair. "I haven't forgotten about you." Chloe rolled her eyes with an amused smile. "I figured as much." Across the room, Susie let out an exasperated sigh. "Can you be serious for 5 minutes?" she asked. Tate glanced up at her, still looking completely unbothered. "I am serious." The remark only deepened the silence. Noah kept his gaze lowered, Talia looked utterly exhausted, and Jack, Mark, and Andrew exchanged uneasy glances, wishing the evening would finally come to an end. Noah's eyes drifted toward the couch for only a moment. A small, unwelcome thought crossed his mind. He wished, just for an instant, that he were the one sitting safely in Tate's lap instead of Chloe. The thought embarrassed him almost as quickly as it appeared. He pushed it aside, reminding himself that Chloe was Tate's wife. Whatever complicated feelings he carried weren't something he intended to act on. A sharp knock echoed through the mansion. Andrew stood. "That must be the food." Tate smiled lazily from the couch. "Must be." Before Andrew could reach the foyer, Noah was already on his feet. "I'll help." The two of them headed toward the front door together. Watching them go, Tate couldn't resist a teasing remark. "Noah's always the butler." Noah paused for a split second, glanced back over his shoulder, then simply shook his head with a faint smile. "Someone has to answer the door." Andrew chuckled under his breath as he opened it for the delivery driver, grateful for the brief distraction from the tense atmosphere that had filled the house all evening. The delivery staff wheeled several carts of food into the dining room, filling the house with the aroma of freshly prepared meals. As everyone began settling into an uneasy silence, Tate looked around the room. "The will reading is tomorrow at 1 in the afternoon." Talia nodded slowly. "I'm sure everything will be listed under Tate's name," she said quietly. According to the family tradition and the legacy of the Blue family, the eldest son of the eldest living son has always inherited everything. No one argued, it was the tradition everyone expected. The following afternoon, the family gathered in Terrence's attorney's office. The conference room was unusually quiet. Talia sat at the head of the long table. Noah, Susie, Andrew, Jack, Mark, Anna, Chloe, and Tate occupied the remaining chairs, each waiting with different expectations. A few minutes after 1 o'clock, the attorney entered carrying several thick folders and a sealed envelope. He greeted everyone with a solemn nod before taking his seat. "Thank you all for coming," he said as he arranged the folders neatly across the table. "The reading of Terrence Blue's last will and testament may now begin." The room fell completely silent. Every pair of eyes was fixed on the attorney, waiting to hear Terrence's final wishes. The attorney rose from his chair and adjusted his glasses before opening the thick leather folder in front of him. He looked around the conference room, making eye contact with each person in turn. "Good afternoon, everyone, thank you all for coming." He paused, allowing the room to settle. "My name is Robert Blanche, Esquire, and I served as Terrence Blue's estate attorney for many years. Before we begin, I want to extend my condolences to the Blue family and to everyone gathered here today. I understand this is a difficult time." No one spoke. The only sound in the room was the quiet hum of the air conditioner. Robert rested one hand on the open file. "As most of you are already aware, the Blue family estate has been governed for generations by a family trust and succession agreement. The majority of Mr. Blue's assets, including his controlling business interests, investment portfolios, real estate holdings, liquid assets, artwork, intellectual property, and other estate property, are distributed according to that long-standing family structure rather than through the discretionary portions of this will." He glanced toward Tate. "Under the terms of that succession agreement, ownership and control of the family estate pass automatically to the current patriarch of the Blue family." The lawyer folded his hands. "Accordingly, all controlling interests of the estate transfer to Tate Blue." A heavy silence filled the conference room. No one appeared surprised. Even Talia had expected as much. Robert continued. "This transfer includes the controlling shares of Blue Holdings, all associated corporations, investment accounts, trusts under the authority of the family succession agreement, residential and commercial properties held by the family's private collections, and all additional assets governed by the trust." He carefully turned another page. "However, Mr. Blue also left several personal instructions that fall outside the automatic succession provisions. Those instructions are the purpose of today's meeting." Everyone's attention sharpened. "There are a number of sentimental items, personal requests, and continuing financial arrangements that Mr. Blue wished to address personally." He removed 3 smaller folders from his briefcase. The first concerns several paintings from Mr. Blue's private collection. He looked toward Andrew. "Andrew, Mr. Blue requested that the painting titled The Leaping Woman is to be placed in your home as requested by you." Another folder. "Susie, the Renoir painting you loved will be placed in your home for the foreseeable future." Finally, "Jack, Mr. Blue likewise requested that the Monet painting you enjoyed be given in trust to your residence." The attorney held up a hand before anyone could speak. "I want to make one point absolutely clear." He spoke deliberately. "These paintings are not gifts." The room became even quieter. "They remain the legal property of the Blue family estate and therefore of its current owner, Tate Blue." Andrew frowned slightly. Robert continued. "You are being granted possession by loan only. So long as the current patriarch of the Blue family consents to the arrangement, you may display the artwork in your homes with the appropriate security systems and camera coverage." He looked from one recipient to the next. "If Mr. Blue continues to approve, the paintings may also be used as financial collateral for loans or mortgages, provided ownership is never transferred and the artwork is never repossessed or sold." He closed the painting files and returned them to his briefcase. "Next, Talia Blue." Talia looked up. "Under the marital provisions established by Terrence Blue, you will receive an annual payment of $100 million for the remainder of your lifetime." Several people quietly exchanged glances despite already knowing Talia would be cared for. The payment shall be released on the first business day of January each year and deposited directly into your designated bank account. This obligation survives any change in ownership of the estate and remains binding upon the current and all future holders of the Blue family assets. Robert turned another page. Finally, regarding the existing trust established by Mr. Joseph Blue prior to his death in 1993. He looked around the room. Those individuals currently receiving monthly distributions of $10,000 from that trust shall continue receiving those payments. He paused. There is, however, one continuing condition. Everyone listen carefully. Should any beneficiary wish to marry, that marriage must receive the approval and support of Tate Blue as the current head of the Blue family. Any beneficiary who marries without that approval shall forfeit all future payments beyond those already distributed. He reached into his briefcase and gestured toward a stack of sealed envelopes on the conference table. I have prepared a complete copy of Mr. Blue's will for each of you. Inside each envelope you will also find my business card. If you have questions after reviewing the document, or if your personal attorney wishes to discuss any portion of the estate, you may contact my office during regular business hours, Monday through Friday, from 9 o'clock in the morning until 5 o'clock in the evening. Robert closed the folder in front of him. If there are no preliminary questions, I will proceed with the remaining documents requiring signatures from the estate's heir and from those receiving loaned property or financial settlements. Once again, the room fell silent. Every eye slowly turned toward Tate, who, with the reading barely underway, had unexpectedly become one of the most powerful men in Lowe's Angels. Robert Blanche looked down at the final document in his folder. There is one final item before we adjourn. He lifted a sealed envelope that was separate from the will. This is a personal letter written by my client, Terrence Blue, to his son, Tate Blue. Mr. Blue instructed that it be read aloud following the conclusion of the estate proceedings. The room became still. Even Tate's expression shifted slightly as the attorney unfolded the handwritten pages. Robert cleared his throat. Dear Totem Joseph Cornelius Blue, I write this in the year 1994, shortly before your marriage to Chloe. I want you to know that, for much of your life, I have been deeply disappointed in the choices you've made. The accomplishment that has given me the greatest pride was your graduating third in your class at Brown. Beyond that, I have too often watched you choose arrogance over humility and impulse over responsibility. Since childhood, you have insisted on getting your own way, regardless of the consequences for yourself or for this family. Too often, your actions have embarrassed the Blue name. I believe Chloe has inherited an enormous burden in trying to build a life with you. Were it not for the laws governing our family trust, I would have seriously considered leaving the estate to someone else. The succession rules prevent me from doing so. I have been troubled by your disregard for family traditions, including your refusal to attend funerals, and by what I see as a lack of compassion toward others. You often appear self-absorbed and dismissive of people whose financial circumstances differ from your own. I believed for a time that Noah might encourage you to become more thoughtful and emotionally open. Instead, I watched you take his loyalty for granted and treat him more like an employee than someone who genuinely cared about you. You have hurt your mother more times than you realize. There have been many moments when I questioned whether I had failed as a father. I tried to raise you into a man worthy of respect, yet we so often found ourselves at odds. You remind me in many ways of your Uncle Joey, brilliant, stubborn, and impossible to control. Even he could never stop enabling you. If the law permitted it, I might have chosen to leave this estate to Noah instead of you. But I cannot override the rules established generations before us. You inherit because the trust requires it, not because I selected you freely. That is a difficult truth for me to admit. I sincerely hope you prove me wrong. If you lead this family and its businesses wisely, then perhaps history will remember you more kindly than I have. Your mother has been instructed to oversee your first 3 years as head of the company. The board of directors will likewise assist you during that transition. Although you possess full authority, I believe you will need guidance. Despite everything I have written, you are still my son. Nothing changes that. Farewell. Terrence Blue. Robert lowered the pages. No one in the conference room spoke. The silence that followed was heavier than anything that had been said during the reading of the will itself. Every eye slowly drifted toward Tate, waiting to see whether he would react to his father's final words. The room remained silent after Robert finished reading the letter. No one seemed willing to speak first. Tate, however, didn't look at the attorney or at anyone seated around the conference table. Instead, his eyes drifted to the far wall of Robert's office. Hanging in a polished wooden frame was a formal portrait of Terence Blue. For several long seconds, Tate simply stared at it. Then, without a word, he slowly raised his hand and extended his middle finger toward the portrait. "Miserable old man," he muttered. The gesture drew a collective gasp from around the room. Susie closed her eyes. "Tate." He ignored her. "You'd only be happy if you watched me ruin myself." His expression remained unreadable as he addressed the portrait as though his father were still standing in the room. "Well, old man." A faint, defiant smile crossed his face. "That self-portrait you have hanging in your office." He nodded toward the frame. "I'm taking it down." He leaned back in his chair. "I'm not having you stare at me every day." The remark hung in the air. Robert cleared his throat but wisely said nothing. Talia lowered her gaze, exhausted by yet another confrontation between father and son, even if one of them was no longer alive. Noah watched Tate quietly, recognizing that beneath the sarcasm and defiance was a lifetime of resentment that neither inheritance nor death had resolved. Tate kept his eyes fixed on the portrait. "Never pleased with anything I did," he said bitterly. He laughed once without any humor. "I've been vice CEO for 3 years. During that time I increased company profits by 20%. He shook his head. Still wasn't good enough. The room remained silent. "Just because he chose to be monogamous and live a quiet, boring life," Tate continued, "doesn't make me a disgrace." His gaze never left the photograph. "If you were standing here right now." He pointed directly at the portrait. "I'd tell you to get fucked." Robert shifted uncomfortably in his chair, while Talia closed her eyes, pained by the outburst. Susie looked as though she wanted to object but stopped herself. Noah simply watched Tate, realizing the anger in his voice wasn't really about the letter, it was the culmination of years of feeling judged by a father whose approval he believed he could never earn. Tate let out a dry, humorless laugh. "The old man always said I'd turn his house into a brothel." He shrugged. "Maybe I will." His expression hardened. At least somebody would be enjoying themselves in that house. No one answered. Tate turned to Talia. "You can keep the house, mother." She looked up at him, surprised. "If I own it," he continued, "I'd probably end up tearing it apart or torching the structure just because it reminds me of him." His voice softened only slightly. "As long as you're alive, it's your home. Live there as long as you want." He paused. "If you ever decide to sell it, send me a letter, we'll handle it then." The room remained silent. Tate glanced one last time at the portrait that still rested on the attorney's credenza. "My father's dead." He turned away. "Let's never talk about him again in my presence." He looked briefly around the room. "You can all go home, I don't care." Without waiting for a response, Tate strode toward the door. He flung it open with enough force that it struck the wall before rebounding on its hinges. A moment later, the sound of his footsteps echoed down the stairwell as he descended the stairs, leaving everyone else sitting in stunned silence. No one immediately followed. They simply listened as the echoes faded, each person absorbing the finality of both Terence's letter and Tate's decision to leave it and his father behind. A few hours later, Noah and Susie drove to the cemetery. They had come to visit Terence's grave and afterward to stop by Joey's plot. As they rounded a line of old cypress trees, Susie suddenly caught Noah's arm. "There," she whispered. Noah looked in the direction she was pointing. Tate stood alone at Joey's grave. He hadn't noticed either of them. Joey's monument dominated the section of the cemetery. The granite headstone was enormous, accompanied by an intricately carved stone statue overlooking the family plot. Noah knew Tate had commissioned the multi-million-dollar memorial himself years earlier. He had also paid Dennis, the cemetery groundskeeper, generously to ensure Joey's grave was meticulously maintained throughout the year. Tate knelt without saying a word. In his hands was a large bouquet of white lilies. He carefully laid the flowers at the base of the headstone, straightened one of the ribbons, and stood there in silence for a few moments. He didn't speak. He didn't cry. He simply looked at Joey's name engraved in the stone. Then he turned and walked away. As he crossed the cemetery, he passed several other Blue family graves, including Terrence's, without stopping or even glancing in their direction. Only after Tate disappeared down the path did Susie finally exhale. "Did you see that?" she said, pointing after him. Noah smiled faintly. "Yeah." "Well," Susie said, her frustration easing for the first time all day, "at least he's visiting someone here." Noah nodded. "He always comes to Joey." For all of Tate's insistence that he hated funerals and cemeteries, Joey had always been the exception. Noah watched the bouquet of white lilies resting against the towering monument and couldn't help thinking that, in Tate's own quiet way, this was how he grieved. Not in crowded chapels or surrounded by speeches, but alone, in front of the one grave he had chosen never to forget. "Has Tate forgiven Joey?" Susie asked quietly. Noah shook his head. "As far as I know, he hasn't." He looked at the bouquet of white lilies resting against Joey's monument. "We talked about it a few months ago. He told me it would never happen." Susie frowned. "That's kind of strange," she said, "holding a grudge against someone and still bringing them flowers." Noah gave a thoughtful nod. "Tate hates being forgotten. I think Joey choosing me over him hurt him more than he ever admitted. He probably took it harder than anyone realized." They stood in silence for a moment, the breeze rustling through the cemetery trees. "I miss Joey," Noah said softly. "He wasn't perfect, but I miss him." His gaze drifted farther across the cemetery. "Linus was great too. He's buried over there." He pointed toward another section. "And Julia, she was lovely." Susie followed his gaze. "I wish I'd had the chance to meet his cousins and grandparents." "You would have liked most of them," Noah replied with a faint smile. "Tate's family were genuinely kind people." He looked back toward the Blue family plots. "If you ever come over to visit Talia, she'll probably let you watch some of the old family videos. She still has boxes full of them." "What are they like?" Susie asked. "They're just recordings of birthdays, Christmases, Thanksgiving dinners, summer barbecues, everyone laughing, telling stories, opening presents, and enjoying the holidays together." Noah smiled wistfully. "It's nice seeing them alive again. For a little while you can forget you're standing in a cemetery." "I was wondering," Susie said as they continued walking between the graves, "why has Tate been in such an awful mood lately?" Noah sighed. "I heard Talia is trying to arrange a dinner at a cafe with Tate and Andrew. She wants the three of them to sit down, have a meal together, and talk about getting him into therapy." He paused. "Ever since his BPD diagnosis came out, she's been worried he'll implode if he keeps bottling everything up." Susie looked back toward Joey's grave. "His poor mother." She shook her head. "I honestly feel bad for Chloe too. If Tate has another one of those off-the-wall binges or emotional spirals, I don't know how she's going to keep living like that." Noah didn't answer immediately. He understood why Talia was worried. The last few days alone had been overwhelming: Terrence's death, the funeral, the reading of the will, and Tate's explosive reaction to his father's final letter. Even someone who didn't know Tate well could see he was carrying years of anger that had finally reached the surface. "I hope he agrees to go," Noah said quietly. "Whether he admits it or not, he's been carrying this for a long time." Susie nodded. "So has everyone around him." That night, Noah lay awake thinking about the image he couldn't get out of his head. Tate is standing alone at Joey's grave. It didn't make sense. Tate wasn't sentimental. He avoided funerals, refused to mourn publicly, and had walked past every other member of his family without so much as a glance. Yet he had stopped for Joey, carefully placing a bouquet of white lilies beside the enormous monument before quietly walking away. Eventually, exhaustion overtook him. As Noah drifted to sleep, memories from years earlier returned. He dreamed of being a teenager again, of a time when he and Tate had been inseparable. They shared everything. The same bedroom. The same late-night conversations. The same jokes that no one else understood. Back then, Noah had believed nothing could ever come between them. The dream shifted, and with it came the ache he had tried for years to bury. From the time he was 15 until his 18th birthday, Noah had secretly hoped that one day Tate would look at him the way Noah looked at Tate. He had waited for some sign. Some moment. Some indication that the feelings might be mutual. They never were. It wasn't anyone's fault. It simply wasn't meant to be. As the dream continued, Noah felt the familiar sting of regret. He had let those unspoken feelings destroy what had once been the most important relationship of his life. For what? For romantic feelings Tate had never asked for. For a fantasy that had never become reality. What a cruel joke. If he could go back, Noah knew exactly what he would do. He would tell Tate the truth the moment he realized how he felt. He imagined the two of them laughing awkwardly about it, teasing each other for a while, acknowledging that teenage crushes happened, and then moving on as friends. Instead, he had stayed silent. The silence had stretched into years. Now it felt impossible to explain. If he confessed everything now, Tate might feel betrayed, not because Noah had loved him, but because all those years Tate had believed their friendship was uncomplicated while Noah had been carrying feelings he never knew existed. That thought hurt more than anything else. In the dream, Noah reached for the younger version of Tate, wanting to warn both of them not to let silence grow into distance. But dreams never listened. The younger Tate only smiled, completely unaware of what the future would bring, while Noah watched the years slip away until he awoke with the familiar feeling that some opportunities once lost could never truly be recovered. Noah stood alone in the middle of an empty parking lot. The asphalt gave way to patches of tall, unkempt grass that pushed through the cracks, as though the place had been abandoned years ago. Everything beyond the lot was shrouded in a dull gray haze. In the distance stood what appeared to be an enormous warehouse, its weathered metal walls blending into the overcast sky. There were no signs, no windows, no indication of where he was or why he had come. It was as if the world simply ended beyond the warehouse. No birds sang. No wind blew. The silence was unsettling. Tate slowly turned in a circle, searching for something familiar, but there was nothing except the endless parking lot, the overgrown grass, and the looming warehouse disappearing into the mist. Then he heard it. The low rumble of an engine. He looked toward the sound. A lone pickup truck emerged from the gray horizon, its headlights cutting through the haze as it rolled steadily toward him. The truck wasn't speeding. It moved with quiet purpose, its tires crunching softly over the gravel and broken pavement. Noah remained where he was, watching as it drew closer. For reasons he couldn't explain, he had the strange feeling that whoever was behind the wheel had come specifically for him. The pickup truck rolled to a stop a short distance away. As Noah watched, the scene seemed to shift. Suddenly, he wasn't standing in the parking lot anymore. He was watching the inside of the truck as though he were an invisible observer. Tate sat in the front passenger seat. Beside him, a man sat behind the wheel, but Noah couldn't see his face. Their mouths moved rapidly. Whatever they were arguing about was heated, but Noah couldn't hear a single word. It was as if someone had muted the entire world. He could only see their expressions, Tate's growing frustration and the driver's rigid posture. The driver's hand reached toward the glove compartment. He opened it. Noah's stomach tightened. The man pulled out a handgun. Tate's eyes widened. In one swift motion, he shoved the passenger door open. Before the driver could react, Tate threw himself out of the truck and hit the pavement, scrambling to his feet as the open door swung wildly behind him. Noah tried to shout Tate's name. Nothing came out. He could only watch the nightmare unfold, powerless to intervene. Noah had never seen Tate run that fast. The only other times he had ever seen Tate move with that kind of blind panic were when Tate believed he had seen a ghost. The expression on Tate's face chilled Noah to the bone. Pure terror. His eyes were wide with fear, and tears streamed down his cheeks as he sprinted across the empty parking lot without looking back. Whatever had happened inside that truck had terrified him. The driver's door swung open. The man climbed out slowly. From where Noah stood, he still couldn't make out the man's face. It remained hidden in shadow as though the dream itself refused to let Noah see who was chasing Tate. Noah tried to run after Tate. He tried to scream. But his feet refused to move, and no sound came from his mouth. He could only watch as Tate ran for his life. The man raised the gun toward Tate. Tate was nearly 900 feet away, running across the empty lot, but Noah could still see the fear on his face. The gun fired. The sound should have echoed across the warehouse grounds, but the dream swallowed it. The shot passed impossibly close, missing Tate by only a few centimeters. Tate stopped. For a moment he just stood there frozen. Then he slowly turned around. He faced the man holding the gun. The distance between them was too great for Noah to hear anything, but he could see the man's mouth moving. He was saying something to Tate, something that seemed important, something that made Tate's expression change. The man lifted 2 fingers. Then he pointed toward the warehouse door. Noah watched as Tate looked toward the building. Slowly, Tate began moving to the left, away from the direct path between them. Then suddenly he ran. The man reacted instantly. He rushed forward, closing the distance between them. Tate barely had time to turn before the man grabbed him and pulled him down. They hit the ground hard. Noah watched helplessly as the two of them struggled in the dirt, their movements frantic and desperate. Tate fought with everything he had, trying to break free while the other man held on tightly. Noah tried to reach them. Tried to call out. But the dream kept him trapped, forcing him to watch as Tate fought for his life in silence. The struggle continued for what felt like hours. The man finally overpowered Tate. He grabbed him from behind, pulling him upright and locking an arm around his neck, holding him tightly against his chest. Tate struggled against him, trying to break free, but the man's grip didn't loosen. Noah still couldn't see the man's face. The dream kept it hidden in darkness. But this time Noah heard him. "We go back from where we came from." The man's voice was low and calm. "Or we go in there." He glanced toward the abandoned warehouse. The words seemed to hang in the air. Tate stopped fighting for a moment. His eyes moved toward the building. Then the man tightened his grip and dragged Tate backward. Toward the warehouse. Toward the open door waiting in the darkness. Noah tried to move. Tried to reach them. "Tate." But his voice disappeared into the silence. The man pulled Tate inside. The heavy metal door swung shut behind them. The sound echoed across the empty parking lot. Then everything went black. Noah shot awake in bed, his heart racing. For several seconds, he didn't know where he was. He stared into the darkness of his bedroom, breathing hard, trying to separate the dream from reality. But the image wouldn't leave him. Tate's terrified face. The warehouse. The man whose face he never saw. And the feeling that whatever was behind that door, Tate had been running from it for a very long time. A few miles away, Andrew was asleep when his phone suddenly rang. The sound cut through the quiet of his bedroom. Still half asleep, he reached over and answered. "Hello." For a moment there was only breathing on the other end. Then he heard Noah's voice. "Andrew." Something about the tone immediately woke him up. Noah sounded shaken. Hysterical. "What's wrong?" Andrew asked, sitting up. "I need to talk to you." Andrew glanced at the clock beside his bed. 4 a.m. "Okay," he said carefully. "It's 4 a.m. Where do you want to meet?" There was a pause. "Could you come to my house?" Noah asked. Andrew didn't hesitate. "I'll be there in 15 minutes. He ended the call and got dressed, his concern growing. Noah wasn't someone who called in the middle of the night without a reason. Whatever had happened, Andrew knew it had scared him badly. Andrew arrived at Noah's house 15 minutes later. The moment he stepped inside, he knew something was wrong. Noah was standing in the living room, pale as a sheet. His face looked exhausted and his hands kept fidgeting as though he couldn't calm himself down. "Are you okay?" Andrew asked. Noah shook his head. "Did you have a nightmare about Terrence, the funeral, everything that happened today?" "No." Andrew frowned. "I had a nightmare," Noah said quietly, "but it wasn't about Terrence, it wasn't about the funeral." He swallowed hard. "It was the worst dream I've ever had." Noah looked away, trying to collect his thoughts. "Except..." He hesitated. "Except for the time I dreamed about seeing Tate's body decomposing." Andrew went still. He knew Noah had experienced disturbing dreams before, but the fear in Noah's voice was different. "What happened?" Andrew asked. Noah looked at him. "I don't even know how to explain it." "Was it about Tate?" Andrew asked. Noah nodded. The answer alone told Andrew how serious this was. "Do you mind if I record this?" Andrew asked. Noah hesitated for only a moment before shaking his head. No. Andrew pulled out his cassette recorder and placed it carefully on the table. He pressed the button. And the quiet mechanical click filled the room as the tape began to turn. "Why don't we sit at the table?" Andrew said gently. They moved to the kitchen table, the early morning darkness still covering the windows. Andrew looked down and spoke clearly into the recorder. Session notes, February 14th, 4:15 a.m. He looked back at Noah. "Go ahead, tell me what happened. I want you to start from the beginning. Tell me everything you remember, the location, who was there, what you saw, what you heard. Don't skip anything, even if it seems insignificant, whenever you're ready." "I didn't drink anything," Noah said quickly. "I just went straight to bed after I had one of my frozen dinners. I didn't even have a date with Riley today. I came home, ate, and went to sleep." Andrew listened quietly, letting him speak. "The dream was so real, Andrew." Noah rubbed his hands together, still shaken. "It wasn't like a normal dream, it felt like I was actually there." He looked down at the table. "It was during the afternoon. I was standing in an abandoned parking lot." Andrew glanced briefly at the recorder but didn't interrupt. "I can't honestly say I've been there before," Noah said, "but that's the strange part, it felt familiar." He swallowed. It was so hazy and gray.